Welcome to the First Things First podcast. And first things first, we need you to subscribe and leave comments letting us know what you think of the show. We're listening. I'm Nick Wright, joined by two of my favorite people, Jenna Wolfe, Cris Carter. Now, let's get the show started.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolfe. That, as always, is the Hall of Famer Cris Carter. This is Nick Wright on the last show for us of 2017.
Our 87th show, our final, or 84th show of the year, pardon me. Final show of the year.
Nice. You guys look great today.
You as well. I love that sport coat, CC. That's one of my favorites that you have.
Thank you.
It's our own little, like, New Year's Eve thing at,
Yes.
like, 4 a.m. on a Friday.
Absolutely
basically.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly
We
right.
like to look nice.
We're the only ones celebrating. All right, let's start the program with America's Game of the Week. It is the Panthers. It is the Falcons. It is on Sunday, and it is on Fox. Oh, and it does matter. First for Atlanta. They control their own postseason destiny. If they win, they're in. Then there's Carolina, already in the playoffs. But a win and a Saints loss gets them a home game. Cam Newton talked about the importance of this one. Take a listen.
I guess it's put up or shut up time come Sunday. That's the only time when no talking can ever affect, the gameplay. So it's all about the outcome of the game, and that's what I'm hoping our outcome is greater.
This is what it's like in the playoffs. And so basically for us, the playoffs have started, and you win and you continue to play. It's fun to be a part of that. As competitors, that's where you want to be at the end of the year. You want to be in these type of situations. And so a lot of hard work has gone into getting us into this position, and now it's about relaxing, having fun, and being detailed with our work.
All right, CC, I love what Cam said, actually. Like, it's words all week, but all that matters is the two teams who show up on Sunday. Let's start with Carolina. What do you need to see from the Panthers besides a win to buy them as actual contenders?
Well, Carolina's a good football team. They've already qualified for the playoffs, and they have one of the true superstars in the National Football League in Cam Newton. So collectively, they know how to win games a variety of ways. And when you have that going into the playoffs, they also have playoff experience. Now, they weren't in the playoffs last year, but they have had playoff success as an organization. So there's a comfort level for them. They know the type of football they have to play. They also have an identity. They know they know they have to be a physical team. They know they have to put the ball in their quarterback's hands to be able to run the ball and throw the ball, not like the rest of the quarterbacks that are going to be in the playoffs. And it's like basketball. Cam Newton on any given day could be the best player on the field. So his team's going to have a chance, especially with the great defense that they have. So Cam is not under as much pressure as some of the other quarterbacks because he can rely on his legs. He doesn't have to be as accurate as some of the other guys. Their passing game has been inconsistent, but they've been able to win. And that creates a lot of confidence throughout the roster. Like if some of the teams, if they can't throw the ball, if New England can't throw the ball, they're not going to be able to advance in the playoffs. Pittsburgh, if they can't throw the ball, they're not going to be able to advance. But Carolina's one of the teams that they don't have to be able to throw the ball well because of the way their offense is run and the way their defense has been consistent. Nick?
So the Cam doesn't have to throw the ball well for them to win. It's very hard for them to win if he is not throwing it well and then also not getting it done with his legs. Earlier in the year, when they've won 7 of their last 8. So prior to that stretch, the big difference wasn't Cam was a lot worse than he's been, or the big difference was Cam wasn't running the ball as much. They were being more cautious with him coming off the injury.
Yes.
Now that Cam has become their feature back, essentially, similar to what he was in 2015 when they were 15-1, they are able to get away with some of the more inconsistent throwing performances. And I'm sure you have an updated fancy graphic to show me Cam's inconsistencies. I will say this about the Panthers as a whole. One thing that I really like for them in the postseason is not only are they rushing the ball better the last 8 weeks, averaging 175 yards per game running the last 8 weeks of the season, they are one of the only teams in the league that I know can get to the quarterback with just 4. Their defensive line, they have on the season, it's 40 sacks from their defensive line alone. They don't have to send Thomas Davis.
Right.
They don't have to send Luke Kuechly. They don't have to send Bradbury on a corner blitz. It can just be Mario Addison, Julius Peppers, K'Wan Short, Wes Horton, Kyle Love. They're getting back this week Charles Johnson, who hasn't been very productive this year, but he had been suspended, so he'll at least be another fresh body on the D-line. So
yeah, he might be fresh, but typically guys, based on my experience, when they come back from a performance enhancement suspension, typically they're not in the same physical shape. They don't have the same type of definition.
Their performance isn't quite as enhanced post-suspension?
Yes.
Okay.
So he is coming back as a body.
Right. It's just another fresh body that I will say.
But for full disclosure.
Okay, it's totally fair. But that D-line, I don't love the Panthers' corners. So you really don't want them to be in man-to-man. Right. If you have to send a bunch of people to get at the quarterback, they're going to be in man-to-man a lot. The fact that they can get at the quarterback with 4 guys, the fact that they have a good rushing attack is why I am bullish on them, and they're in a really weird spot. I can't remember the last time a team went in the last week of the season where they could be the 2, the 3, the 4, or the 5. Like, it's very difficult for them to be the 2 seed. They need a lot of things to happen, most notably Mitch Trubisky to beat the Vikings. So they almost surely won't be the 2 seed, but they could be anywhere 2 through 5 in these playoffs.
UCC mentioned that the Panthers have this comfort level. They weren't in the postseason last year. They were the year before. If you look on the other side at the Falcons, they were in the postseason last year. In fact, they were in the Super Bowl last year, and yet confidence just doesn't seem to be the word that we would ever use with this Atlanta Falcons team. Yes, a win and they're in. They could also get in with a loss, I think. What is it? Seattle has to lose.
Seattle loses, they're in.
Regardless, how much would it mean for the Falcons to win this, at least for their confidence, to win this because they set the tone and they set the stage and they went out and won it?
I mean, they would love an opportunity to get into the playoffs, to try to redeem themselves. They would look at themselves as a dangerous team, barely getting in because their experience. They would say they have a chip on their shoulder from last year, but history would say that they're not going to make it. I mean, they are a mediocre offense. This is not nearly the same team. They could get to the playoffs, but they can't score points in bunches that the way they could last year. Their defense is still about middle of the pack now, so their defense is able to get exploited because of lack of productivity, Matty Ice, and this offense. We've talked about it all year. You know, it is not the same since Kyle Shanahan went to San Francisco. So we can't act as if, all of a sudden in week number 17, like they're getting ready to show up and they're getting ready to score 30 points.
Right.
No, we got 15 games of film that says no, they're a mediocre offense, and they can't be special when they're only mediocre from an offensive standpoint.
What helps, I would say, the Falcons' confidence going into this game is, yes, they lost to the Panthers earlier this year, but if you remember, that was a game that changed on a very odd Julio Jones drop. Remember, you diagrammed it for us. It was wide open down the field. The ball, you were talking about how it crossed one of his eyes, and it was, I mean, they had an opportunity to win that football game.
That was a good football game.
Here is, when you look at the numbers, because we now have essentially a full season compared this season to last year, Falcons to Falcons. This was shocking to me when I looked this up. Rushing, last year, 120 yards a game. This year, 119 yards a game. Both years about 4.5 a carry. Last year they had 34 sacks. This year they have 37 sacks. Let me do one of my favorite things, the blind reveal here. Let me show 2 wide receivers, 2 stats. Those years, 83 catches to 83 catches, 1,409 yards, 1,364. Average per catch about the same. Show me who those people are, if you would, please. Julio last year and this year. So Julio, with the exception only 3 touchdowns to 6, he's having about the same year. Here's the difference. It's Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, without Kyle Shanahan, has gone back to being who Matt Ryan has always been prior to last year, a good but not great quarterback. Matt Ryan's going to throw for 1,000 fewer yards. He has the biggest drop-off in passer rating of any quarterback in the league by far. I would have thought, they're not getting Julio the ball enough. Julio has the same number of catches as he did last year, and he's got a game left. The difference is they're not being as effective in throwing to their running backs. They're not being as effective in throwing to their secondary wide receivers. And that, to me, is a schematic thing. That's the difference between the Falcons team that was setting records last year and the Falcons team this year.
To me, the Falcons and Carolina have the same problem. You talked about Matt Ryan. He doesn't have the Carolina defense. So Cam can be inconsistent. You talk about Matty Ryan. Cam can get away with it because his defense has been great. But both of these teams lack big play ability. When Cam was special in 2015, the big play, right? Teddy Ginn and a bunch of people. Last year, Atlanta. Julio's numbers are still the same, but the other players making those big plays aren't there. So both of these teams have that problem as far as how I'm going to generate big plays. And Carolina, the only way they can be special if Cam is consistent and special, which I'm sure we'll dive into later.
When we made predictions, NFL predictions back in September. A lot of people had the Seahawks going to the Super Bowl. Not me, of course. I was busy thinking the Tampa Bay Bucks were the team to beat. But that's not important now. Forget the Super Bowl. The Seahawks now need help just to make the playoffs. They not only have to beat Arizona, they need the Falcons to lose to Carolina. Otherwise, they're home for the postseason for the first time since Russell Wilson came to town. But, Cece, here's my question to you. Would making the playoffs alter the Seahawks' plan for the future? Would they put all the changes that you think that they need to make on hold and ride this out and see what they could do with the same core next year?
No, it's got nothing to do. John Snyder's one of the best general managers in pro football. He realizes that they're too old. He realizes they have too much money for their defense. They take up too much of the salary cap. No, it's got nothing to do with this game. It's got zero to do with it. Like, what's going to change? Like, somebody give me some, like, what's going to change with their overall plan.
What about if they go deep into the playoffs?
It's not going to matter. Their offensive line is horrible. They have no running game. Those things will be matters that have to be handled this offseason.
No matter what.
Yeah, what difference does it make if they get into the playoff? They barely get in. Do they look like a Super Bowl caliber team?
Well,
No, forget what y'all think. John Snyder, do y'all think him and Pete Carroll think this is a Super Bowl caliber team?
But there was talk of blowing up this team.
Hold on. If they make the playoffs for the 6th straight year, will have never missed under Russell Wilson, and they can look at it and say, okay, our offensive line isn't good, but it got better once we got Dwayne Brown. Our big issues defensively were 2 season-ending injuries that we're not going to expect to happen again next season. And here is an extenuating factor. We have one of the best coaches in the league, but he is also, I know this will surprise people because of how he looks, Pete Carroll is the oldest coach in football. He will be 67 years old after week 1 next year. Do we want to start something of a rebuild when our coach likely is not going to be there to see it out, when Russell Wilson is entering, if not already in, the prime of his career, or if we make the playoffs for the 6th straight year, run this back, use our draft picks to grab a running back, try to upgrade the offensive line, retain Dwayne Brown.
Fill in the
like,
hole.
I don't think, given everything that's gone wrong for them this year,
so they're going to bring back all their defensive players.
Their defensive players.
What are they going to do with Sheldon Richardson? His contract's up.
Sheldon Richardson is not a guy they have to bring back. Sheldon Richardson was not a guy they absolutely needed. He was a guy they.
So they just traded for him for 1 season.
What? Yeah, I think that's absolutely.
You think they gave
up
that 1 draft pick for him to come over for 1 season?
If I remember, I think they gave up a 5th round pick for Sheldon Richardson.
That's still.
It's still no. Go ahead. I mean, it's still something. I'm saying.
What round did Richard Sherman get drafted in?
4th round.
Oh, okay. Those are good picks. Those are good players. They just don't give away those picks.
And Sherman might have been a 5th round.
They don't think you're going to be a player with the franchise to trade that kind of pick for. All right. He's too young. They have too much. Cam, he's got a neck issue. He might be done playing football. So they were going to have to change that anyway. Earl Thomas in the last year, they tried to trade Richard Sherman last year. Now he tore his Achilles. So what do you think? You think it's not on the board for him to get cut or take a pay cut?
No, of course it's on the board. I'm not at all saying it's definitive. If they make the playoffs, they
it doesn't matter about the playoffs. It's not a total reboot in Seattle because they got Russell. All right, they got enough good players. No, it's not a total reboot, but getting in the playoffs has zero to do with the type of changes that they have to make. They have been to the Super Bowl a couple times, and they realize this is not a roster that looks like a Super Bowl roster.
Well, but here's if it had stayed healthy, if they win this week and they win 10 games, if they stay healthy, I would say that's 11 or 12 wins.
It doesn't matter. Even if they stayed healthy, they have to change the disproportionate amount of dollars they have allocated to the defense. Over the last 3 years, they have spent the least number of resources on offensive line. All right? They know that they can't have a running game. They can't protect Russell. They're already paying Russell over $100 million. They have to protect that investment, and that does not change based on playoffs or no playoffs.
But is via the draft and 1 free agent signing, if you retain Dwayne Brown, is that not potentially upgrading the offensive line? It's been 1st-round pick on lineman. You keep Dwayne Brown, and then your 1 marquee offseason signing is another lineman. That's 3 major upgrades.
You need a corner. Okay, you need a safety, right? There's a bunch of needs that they do have.
So you're more of the belief that Cam Chancellor is because of the neck injury?
Based on everything I've heard, that he might be done playing football.
Well, that would change things, right? But if he's not done playing
I'm considering all that information when I answer the question.
For sure.
All right, the Cam Chancellor not going to be playing. Richard Sherman, they tried to trade him last year. He tore his Achilles. All right? We know Earl Thomas. He went to Dallas's locker room last week and said, hey, bro, when they kick me to the curb, come get me. Do you think that Earl Thomas thinks he's going to be in Seattle for a long time? He don't think he's going to be there.
But I don't think it has to be for a long time. I'm talking about for the 2018 season. Here's the right now.
I just don't think you're not considering who Pete Carroll are and John Snyder, who they are, and how they have acquired talent and the type of players that they look for. All right, for you to think that they're not going to change this, it's just not knowing the people that are involved. Pete needs talented ball players.
Right.
All right? Pete realizes they got to get younger from a defensive standpoint. He tried to get younger last year.
Go ahead, Jenna.
If everybody was healthy and they didn't have the rash of injuries that they had, would they still have this dire need to get younger and to
yes, it doesn't matter. Their salary cap is disproportionate.
So we knew from the beginning. You knew from the beginning this was going to be their 1 year.
Yeah, this was the last year. I picked them for the Super Bowl because I thought this would be the last year with these guys collectively together. You don't go to the combine and announce, hey, Richard Sherman's open for business. Anybody want Richard Sherman? If you don't think that we're trying to make changes. Now, Richard Sherman is one of Pete Carroll's guys. When you put a guy like that on the trading block, you know that everything else is on the board on that team except Russell Wilson and probably Bobby Wagner.
So you're not surprised by what happened this year. What surprises you most about this Seahawks team?
Well, I mean, what surprised me most is you lost 2 of your 3 best defensive players due to season-ending injury midway through the year. Like, I didn't account for that. I didn't see Richard Sherman, who had never missed a game in his career, knew he had a sore Achilles. I didn't think his Achilles was going to pop. I didn't think for the second straight year, the offensive line would be as bad as it was. Maybe I should have because they didn't allocate new resources to it. Maybe that's one I should have seen coming. I assumed it would get better, similarly to how I thought the Giants' offensive line would get better. I was 0 for 2 on predicting offensive lines to improve. The reason I'm keying on the playoffs, and I understand that you're saying you have to look bigger picture than that.
Well, I think I know the people, and I think I know their overall philosophy. And I know that it's predicated on bringing in young players. He runs a system a lot like Jimmy Johnson's system. It is not friendly to veteran players. They practice too hard. They have a lot of physical contact. Look, they got fined by the Players Association and by the NFL for not being in response to physical contact. Padded practices, tackling when they shouldn't have been tackling.
Lost a draft pick, I think.
This is the system that Pete Carroll runs. It needs young, fresh bodies to run it. It's not my opinion. This is Pete Carroll's system.
So the reason, just finish my point, the reason that I am keying on the playoffs is I think right now, I think people will be shocked by this. Right now, when we don't know if Seattle or Atlanta is going to make the playoffs, there's only 3 teams in the league that are making the playoffs this year that made it last year. So like the playoff streaks in the NFL right now, New England is at 9. The Steelers are at 4. My Kansas City Chiefs are at 3. No one else is above 1. If Atlanta makes it, they'll be at 2. If Seattle makes it, they'll be at 6. And so the reason I keep saying if they make the playoffs, I think it's when you have a 66-year-old coach, when you've got a quarterback who's still awesome. I think if you do in the year from health still make the postseason, to then all of a sudden make wholesale changes in the offseason, I think it'd be a tough sell. If your point is it's not wholesale changes as long as you have Wagner and Russell Wilson, I understand that.
To think that we're going to keep seeing this Seattle team together like we're naive. All right? To think that we're going to see Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Sherman and them, to think we're naive. We're naive to what's really going on. And I believe John Snyder, this offseason, like we're going to see it. Like we're going to see it. We almost saw it last year. They're the ones said, I didn't come up with the rumor that they want to trade Richard Sherman. They announced it to the NFL. So if you think they weren't going to make those changes last year, going into 2018, how would they get better? There's a team in L.A. called the Rams. And the Seattle, they better watch out for them. All right? Because that is the new kid on the block.
All right, let's move on to the Cowboys. A tale of 2 seasons for Dak Prescott. 13-3 as a rookie with 23 touchdowns, just 4 picks and a trip to the postseason. Pat yourself on the back, good man. 8-7 this year, 21 touchdowns, 13 picks, and an early winter break. Walk that back, fall back, take that back. Of course, Dak dealt with a lot in 2017. Is Zeke in? Is Zeke out? To say nothing of his unathletic receiving core and injuries to his O-line. So it begs the question, which season did Dak learn more from? Take a listen.
A big amount from both. I mean, it's hard to say that this year's taught me more than last year. This year's taught me how to deal with a lot more adversity, obviously, than last year did. So to answer that, and then last year taught me how to deal with success. So, I mean, it's from one end of the spectrum to the other.
I know, warm oatmeal. We have talked about this a lot, but now as we're approaching the end of their season, the end of year 2 for Dak Prescott, Cece, how should the Cowboys feel about him after his sophomore season?
They should realize how important it is to put some other weapons around him.
Okay.
Have some playmakers around him. This was a season that they'll look back on and realize that there wasn't a whole bunch they could change. The season would always be swirled around Zeke getting suspended, when he would be suspended, and then they have some injuries, which we've seen through the league. But Dak did not grow from year 1 to year 2 the way we expect or see the growth from other quarterbacks. They'll blame that on a lot of things. Inconsistency from an offensive standpoint. Offensive line wasn't as good. The offensive coaches were not as creative. People were more ready for Dallas. Zeke had a good year rushing the football. They could still run the football, but their overall passing game suffered, and his inability to protect the football. Right. So you did learn more things about Dak in year number 2 than you probably knew after year number 1.
Here's the thing to me. I look at year 3 as almost from a reputation standpoint, from a hierarchy in the league standpoint, almost like a second rookie year. Because all the equity Dak had built up after his rookie season, I think was erased after year 2. I think Dak goes into this next year, with people not knowing who he is as a quarterback. Here's where he is to me right now. I look in the NFC, 16 teams, 16 quarterbacks. There's only 4 guys that I definitively, no question about it, would rather have Dak than. Eli, Mitch Trubisky, Jameis Winston, Carson Palmer. Those are the 4. There are 10 guys I know right now I feel better about than I do Dak. Wentz, Cousins, Rodgers, Breeze, Ryan, Cam, Goff, Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo. So, like, that is, at least as far as his standing in my eyes, and I know, Cece, you did not have him nearly as high as I did, but I was not the only person that thought Dak was one of the soon-to-be stars of this league. And now, after this season, after we see how reliant he is on a perfect surrounding situation, I don't think you can have that belief anymore. And now that we've seen, in the face of adversity, some of those easy throws he was so good at last year, he starts to miss. You start to question what his actual real future, I don't want to say future in the league, but what type of player he's going to be in this league is.
But when we talk about improving after year 1 to year 2, what else could you have seen in Dak Prescott after year 1 besides winning a playoff game? Like, what else could he have improved on? He was hitting on all cylinders. It was hard to tell because he had so many weapons available to him, but it's hard for me. Okay, so maintained. He could have just looked the same as he did for the most part the first year. It's just hard for me to know, like, how much more you could have and wanted to see from him after what you saw his first year.
Well, the number one thing you want to see, the progression from a pocket passer. All right? Can we throw the ball? If they take us out of our running game, can we throw the ball 35 times? We had a debate earlier in the season, hey, who would you rather have, Carson Wentz or Dak? I was like, that's not even a question. All right? I'd rather have Carson Wentz. And you were like, wow, Dak is I was like, listen, he cannot rely on throwing the ball 35 times. So that was the growth that I wanted to see. Now, I blame a lot of that on lack of creativity by the offensive coaches and lack of explosive players. Jason Witten is old and slow. Much respect to him. Dez has been subpar. These are realities. This is not like Chris Carter came up with some hot take. They don't have explosive players. When you miss Bryce Butler as a deep threat, you know you got problems. Right. So a lot of these things going on around him, it made it hard for him to grow. I'd like to see him be a lot more accurate, and as a quarterback, you have to be able to take care of the football.
What it will be interesting to see in year 3, because I do think the interceptions this year were something of an aberration. I think year one was a bit of an aberration. I think the propensity for, he had 4 last year, 13 this year. I think he's probably more somewhere in the middle there. The question to me is going to be, if CeCe's right that there is going to be a new offensive coordinator in Dallas, if you have a more creative offense, and if I'm right that they are going to either via the draft or free agency spend money or assets on a real number 1 option at wide receiver, if you have a dynamic playmaker, be it tight end even, tight end or wide receiver, a down-the-field playmaker, right, and a more creative offense, along with Ezekiel Elliott, how can Dak Prescott look? That's what will define where he actually is in this NFC quarterback
But like I say, this is not fantasy football, all right? There's a salary cap. They got a bunch of offensive linemen. They're getting paid a lot of money. If they don't win with Dak and Zeke on their first contract, it's going to be hard for them to win. So it's hard for them to go out and get a number 1 guy when you have Dez Bryant under contract. They do not have the dollars to be able to go out and rebuild their defense and be able to go out and get another wide receiver. So for the most part, he's going to have to try to work with some of the players he has. And I believe they will make some moves, but it's really hard for them to get better offensively because they got 3 all-pro offensive linemen, okay? And those guys are making good money. And some of them are on their second contract. So it makes it hard to maneuver. I know people want to, hey, get another wide receiver, get a tight end. But all those cost money,
right,
all right? And they already have a talented offensive line that's in place.
I just don't, maybe in this discussion for another day, I don't think they have to spend a ton of money on the defense. I liked how the defense played the last couple months of the year. My big free agent acquisition, especially if I got rid of
They need at least 1 more linebacker.
Sure.
Because we can't keep making the excuse, oh, if Sean Lee's hurt, they're done.
Absolutely.
Oh, they're like, oh, what happened? Well, Sean Lee's hurt. Well,
right. Welcome back to First Things First. We welcome in, hands down, our best, funniest, most informed guest, Coach Eric Mangini.
What up, Coach? Good to see you.
Finally got that intro right.
You got that
All right.
Well, you wrote it, so it was
True.
hard to do. Yeah. How's it going?
It's fantastic.
Happy to have you here on our last show of 2017. We're going to make this one a good one. Coach,
right.
Let's chat a little Steelers in what can only be described as an unconventional news source. Pittsburgh's offensive lineman Marcus Gilbert says Big Ben and Le'Veon Bell will rest for Week 17. Not sure when Marcus started announcing personnel moves, but regardless, Ben and Bell out for Sunday against the Browns, well, according to him. But here's the thing. If both the Steelers and Patriots, who are playing the Jets, somehow lose, Pittsburgh will be kicking themselves if they have to visit Foxborough in a few weeks. First of all, Coach, you surprised that Marcus Gilbert is talking about, you know, who's going to play and who's not going to play in Week 17?
Yeah, of course I am. But as we say over and over on the show,
tell them, Coach.
Every family has a different way.
Different strokes, different folks.
Even the Steelers family, they didn't expect this one. Their right tackle announces their quarterback's not playing.
Yeah, nobody's fired up that information is coming out early because it allows the team that you're playing against to prepare for the guys that are going to be in there replacing them, and it gives them extra prep time. You don't really want to do that.
All right, regardless, so say it is the case. Is it the right move for them to sit these guys out?
Well, I feel like we discuss this twice a year. So we discuss this the 4th preseason game, and we discuss this last game of the season.
But there are stakes with the last game of the season.
Well, there's stakes even at the start because you're talking about the same thing. It's, are you willing to risk an injury to one of your key players going into the playoffs? And the debate is ongoing, and it goes. I've seen it go well both ways, and I've seen it go poorly both ways. The one thing I'll say is you can't replace Big Ben. So if he gets hurt in this game, you can't. The next guy up is not going to be the same, and it's the same thing in New England. If you lose Tom Brady, you got a problem. And I remember in 2009 when Wes Welker was playing. I think he had 124 catches that year.
Yes.
They're playing Houston. It really doesn't make a difference in their seeding. They wanted to play the guys. Routine play. He gets knocked out, and it dramatically changes their chances in the playoffs. So I do feel that if you can rest your guys and you feel comfortable with the fact that they'll respond the right way, because not every player responds the right way to that extra rest,
right,
then I think you should do it.
And you can't take for granted that you're in that locker room and you know what Big Ben needs, what L. Bell needs. Like, sometimes we're a little intrusive, thinking that we know what's best for the team compared to when you're there every day. You know who has the nicks, the bumps, who really needs the rest. So it's obviously in the family, they've discussed, man, we got to give Ben some time off. L. Bell I mean, we have rode him for 15 weeks. We need to give him some time off. Now, we don't expect one of the brothers and sisters to go out and tell the rest of the people, but based on the family, like inside, you know a lot better than us as outsiders. So if Mike Tomlin says, you know, we need to rest Ben, I agree with Mike Tomlin. If they say we need to rest L. Bell, I agree with that. You know the reason why? They've had experience in the playoffs. Now, if this is Jacksonville, this is the Rams, you can question them because they're new at it. But Pittsburgh, they've done this before. So you have to trust the people and the information that is coming out of Pittsburgh. They know what's at stake. You're relying on the Jets to beat New England.
Right.
Like, man, get you some rest.
Well, that's the question that I was going to ask you, Coach. Is it surprising? The Steelers are not locked into the 2 seed. They're only locked into the 2 seed if New England wins. And I understand New England's a huge favorite. It's the Jets. The New England doesn't appear to be resting people. I get all that. But the 1 seed would be hugely advantageous for them. These games are being played at the same time. Are you surprised that a team that still could get the 1 seed would do this?
Well, I think there may be an element of what you do every week where they're predicting what's going to happen with New England, New York, and betting on the fact that New England is going to be able to defeat New York. Now, the people that should be the most excited are the Browns. I mean, this is a great opportunity with those guys missing to avoid 0-16. Right. That's where the most excitement in the league should come right now.
So here's the other factor here, which is so the Rams this week, for example. The Rams cannot get a bye. They're going to be the 3 or the 4 seed. They're resting guys. They know they have a game a week from now. They just don't know who they're playing. They know they have a game in Los Angeles in a week, so we're going to rest our guys. The Steelers know they do not play in a week. They have a week off. Is there, Cece, when we talked about Philly, you mentioned how it was important that if they were going to take some starters out, to do it late in the game because with the bye week, the potential for rust, if you have 2 weeks off. Does that register at all with Pittsburgh?
Well, don't you think Philly is a little bit different because
Yes.
you've got a new quarterback
Yes.
who's trying to develop some chemistry. So you're fighting that component of it too because you want to make sure that going into the playoffs, that what happened last week in Philly doesn't happen offensively, doesn't happen when they're in the playoffs. And the Rams situation, to me, that's different than New England or Pittsburgh because you've got a new head coach. He doesn't have the experience that Bill has or Mike Tomlin has. You know, he's making the best decision based off of what he thinks right now, but you tend to lean towards the
But my bigger question is just the rust factor. For the Steelers, 2 weeks off for Big Ben and Le'Veon Bell. Does that concern either
Would you be concerned about New England? Would you be concerned about Aaron Rodgers? Would you be concerned about all these guys that have all this playoff experience? No, you wouldn't be concerned.
And remember,
Philadelphia and Nick Foles, it's not fair to even put them. They don't have momentum. Like Pittsburgh has momentum, all right? Even though they have the 1 drop with Jesse James, they are the number 1 seed. But also, they got the Cleveland Browns, bro. Like, it's easy to make decisions when you're playing the Browns.
You stress so much. I don't know this. You stress a lot about timing, and like the Patriots, you said, would this affect Tom Brady? He missed a Wednesday practice, and we talked about how he just didn't look the same, and maybe it was because he missed a Wednesday practice. This is 2 weeks with Le'Veon Bell and Ben Roethlisberger out. That doesn't affect offensive rhythm at all. That doesn't affect timing. That doesn't affect rust. There's no part of that.
The reason why we brought up Tom Brady was because we started to see a system. Tom had been practicing. He stopped practicing on Wednesday. All right, the games played out that he wasn't as accurate. I didn't draw the conclusion that because it was practice, I just know practice is important. I didn't say because he was practicing, it's also wear and tear.
Sure.
We are at the end of the season. But collectively, these teams are going to do what they think is best. All right, so you're always fighting against injury. So if I can put injury on the sideline, then you're going to do that. And that's the point that Coach talks about as far as the debate. Oh, the last preseason game, people want to debate this. And then now you're talking about home field rest. You have the Browns. This is the perfect time to rest Ben. L. Bell has how many touches this year, Nick?
Well, he has 406 touches, which is most by far, 900 snaps, which is the most.
Let's just use common sense. Forget all the other stuff. Just common sense. This would be the time to get them some rest. You have 2 weeks of great practicing, and the postseason and the preparation is totally different than someone like Nick Foles, who is finishing out for Carson Wentz and trying to get that offense up to speed. He needs confidence. We need Tom and Ben and them healthy. Nick Foles is in a different class.
And no matter how much rust a guy has, if you lose a guy, let's say it's even just a high ankle sprain for 5 weeks, the person who's going to replace Le'Veon Bell or who's going to replace Ben Roethlisberger, no matter how well rested they are, no matter how good they are, no matter what they do, they can't give you what even a rusty player can give
Landry
you.
Jones can't give you Ben Roethlisberger. Come on, coach.
It's a little bit different package.
Well,
and you're just sick if you lose a guy there, same as in the fourth preseason game.
And I want to add one other thing to it, because we talk about the quarterback and the running back. If you have, let's say you have a couple offensive, I know this was Marcus Gilbert talking about it, but let's say you have a couple offensive linemen that you'd really like to give some time, an extra week off. You feel really weird or funny or nervous about giving your center the week off, giving Pouncey the week off, or giving your left tackle the week off if Big Ben's still going to be back there. Like, you don't want to all of a sudden have your backup offensive lineman out there with your starting, or not out there with your starting quarterback out there.
Well, the whole decision-making process is difficult because you're not trying to say that these other players aren't important to you, because they are. But someone's got to play.
Yeah, they're important, but the offensive linemen know they're not as important.
And someone's got to play in the game. And
yes.
those special teams players have to play on offense,
someone's got to play.
And then special teams, you can get guys hurt a different way that affect you, maybe not to the same degree, but makes you vulnerable.
NBA last night, Rockets and Celtics, or in general manager speak, Daryl Morey and Danny Ainge. May the best man win, just saying. So many storylines in this one from last night. This was all but over when Houston led by 26 points in the third quarter. But the Celtics came storming back. Kyrie Irving had 26 points, 19 out of Jason Tatum, and then that clutch game winner from Al Horford. Then there was this. Marcus Smart drawing offensive fouls on James Harden near the Celtics baseline on the Rockets' final 2 possessions. A lot of emotions. Here's James Harden after the game.
First of all, I want to know, how do you only have 2 officials on a national TV game? That's the first question. But a lot of grabbing, a lot of holding. I mean, what am I supposed to? How else am I supposed to get open? A guy has 2 arms wrapped around my whole body. You can't have 2 officials in a professional game. There's a lot of no calls that need to be called because that changes the dynamic of the game. You know, then you got fast break points, no calls, turnovers, or whatever the case may be. But it's a professional game, national TV. Can't happen.
Well, first of all, we should mention there were 2 refs because didn't one hurt his back in pregame warm-ups?
One got
there
hurt.
were
There's usually 3. One got hurt before the game, so it ended up being Tony Brothers and
there just wasn't a backup or a stand-in third, and that's why there were 2 at the end. But, Cece, you have a problem with the offensive fouls called on Harden at the end of the game?
Well, very seldom you ever see those calls, but I was more disappointed in Houston in their lack of running a play to inbounds the ball. I mean, inbounding the ball is a fundamental that from the earliest ages of playing basketball, the person's going to take it out. If they've scored, you can run the baseline, which Houston didn't do with Ariza, and or you put your 2 guards in the backcourt and you either stack them one on top of each other or you put one on each elbow and they pick across the lane to get open. Just to think that you're physically going to take over and throw the ball in, like it's professional, they are going to defend you. Harden at 6'5", 6'6", all they had to do was throw the ball up in the air to him. Like, they made this a lot harder than it was. The refs, they shouldn't have called the first flop. And then the second time, they should have run a play to inbounds the ball. So lack of execution, lack of the fundamental. It just happened that they only had 2 refs on the court. I can understand that. A guy throws out his back before the game. What are they supposed to do? And only having 2 refs, I don't believe, changed the outcome. No, Houston was dominating this game. And because of their lack of shot selection, they allowed Boston to get back into the game. So it shouldn't even have come down to this. But the execution at the end for Houston, it concerns me going forward, especially when they don't have Chris Paul in the game, like who is the floor general, and they really missed him. And Boston, collectively, I believe this will help a very, very young team. Because to show this type of guts, to show this type of togetherness against a quality team in Houston, big win for the Celtics.
And I know we're going to get into the Celtics part of this in a moment. Just on the end of the game, it is somewhat rich, James Harden complaining about flopping. He was complaining about the 2 refs. He didn't like that. The calls at the end. James Harden wasn't that worried about how many refs were out there when prior to the final moments of the game, he had gone to the free throw line 15 times, more than any player in the game by a wide margin. Harden gets the benefit of the doubt on calls more than any player in the league. He has made getting fouled an art form. It's one of the reasons he's such a fantastic offensive player. The first one, listen, this is what Marcus Smart does. Marcus Smart is in there at the end of games as a defensive stopper, as a pesterer, and as well-known, probably the league's best flopper. The first call is what it was. I agree with Cece. They should have run a better play, but they didn't. The second call, to me, in Tony Brothers, who called both of these, has a bit of a reputation of this. The second call was Tony Brothers saying, look at me. Like, you almost never see this called once. To call it back-to-back on the same player when the second one was as obvious of a flop and Brothers is standing staring at it, this is what it was. That's outrageous. And at that moment in time, it is a one-point game. So I understand Houston's frustration, but their real frustration, as Cece mentioned, should be with themselves. You're up 26 points in the second half. You did not run an offense late in the game. I know we're going to talk about the Celtics. The Celtics' last 2.5 minutes execution was not good. Kyrie had a turnover. Al Horford had a terrible turnover coming out of the timeout. They had a Marcus Smart a three that they ran a play for, which was absurd. The Celtics weren't great down the stretch. The Rockets were just horrifying. And so they've got themselves to blame for this loss.
You brought up such a good point about this young Celtics team and their character and what it means to find themselves down 26 points when they're exhausted, when we talk about how many games they've played, when they've had a really tough streak. And then you made a very good point in our morning meeting that this Celtics team has played, 16 games where they've been down 10 points or more, and they're 8-8. So they're flying by the seat of their pants with this whole idea of a comeback. Last night was prime for them to just cash in and be like, forget it, like it's not going to happen. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw from the Celtics and what this comeback means for them as a young organization.
Well, this group, they haven't won a lot of games together. I mean, this was a big game. It was a big-time game against a team that is in a little rut, but they had the best NBA record until the last week. They've lost 4 in a row now. But collectively, to know, even though they're shorthanded, Jaylen Brown's not playing, they're playing with a bunch of guys that probably in the end of the season and next season, which I'm really more excited about because once they get Gordon Hayward back and these valuable minutes these young guys are playing, man, success begets success, especially against quality teams. Like, this will go into their sports memory that, man, know that we can do this. We can get down against a great shooting team and claw our way back into it. And you can believe that Brad Stevens and that staff will let this young team know, and this will benefit them going forward.
The sports memory, I wonder what you think of this. I feel like there could be a pro and a con to it. Because I do think the Celtics clearly have as much, if not more, confidence than any team in the league outside of Golden State late in games. They feel like, rightly or wrongly, they have this closer in the league in Kyrie Irving. They feel like, rightly or wrongly, our coach is going to put us in the best position and that we have just some magic to us. The way they won last week, the game against Indiana, where Indiana just, with a lead, throws the ball in the air at midcourt to gift them a game-winning layup. We can come back from any deficit, and if it's close late, Kyrie will close it for us. I think that's a huge positive. The negative is they do seem, and maybe it's the young players, maybe it's the lack of overall talent, especially not just with Gordon Hayward being out, but with the Jaylen Brown injury. Man, they've played 39 games. To have trailed by double digits in 16 of them, it's like nearly 40% of their games. I worry that there is almost I don't want to say an attitude, but a mindset with them that, like, oh, don't worry, we'll be fine. And against really good teams, typically you're not. Now, Houston is a really good team, and Houston melted down at the end. They were fine. They were down by more than 10. They were down by 24 at the half, 26 early in the third quarter. But it is a dangerous way to play. They have been down by double digits more than any winning team in the league, I think, outside of Cleveland. And so that would be my one concern with their tendency for these comebacks.
All right, the reason why I wouldn't be concerned about that is because if you look at the games that they've played, look at the key players that have missed a lot of games. Morris has missed a lot of games. Jaylen Brown's missed a lot of games. So it's not as if they're more talented. If they were Golden State, if they were Cleveland, I would be more concerned because those teams are more talented than the other teams in the NBA. Boston is not more talented right now without Hayward being in. So when you have less talent than the other team, there's a chance you can get behind. But what they're showing is we have a collective togetherness that we're not going to give up. We do feel like we have confidence in our coach. We do have one of the best closers, but also they have something you can draw on every night, and that's defense. That's how they won last night's game. That's how they won the Indiana game at the end, was on their defense. So that will be their calling card going forward, even if they can't shoot. Like Houston, when they couldn't shoot, there was no calling card as far as defense from their standpoint.
To allow Houston 36 second-half points is a tremendous. I mean, they allowed 62 in the first, 36 in the second. That is a tremendous defensive performance.
You could draw some parallels between these two teams. Both of them shot out to very quick, early, great starts. Both of them are hiccuping right now, kind of around the same time. But this Rockets team, I mean, desperate to get Chris Paul back. They can't win without him in that lineup.
Well, they've been. I don't know if I'd say they can't win without him, but they haven't lost in a game that he's played the entirety of.
Yes.
Late in games, you saw the thing that's killed the Rockets in the postseason, that's been the bugaboo with the Rockets, is if you're going to shoot this many threes, and your offense is going to be running gun shoot threes, how do you hold on to leads? Late in games when you want to draw out the shot clock, and what we saw last night was they reverted back to dribble, 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 James Harden step back. And Harden was having an off-shooting night aside from the free throw line, and their offense just looked awful. I don't think that would have happened with Chris Paul.
I'm Jenna Wolfe, and thank you for listening to the First Things First podcast. Make sure to subscribe and tell your friends, family, and coworkers about the podcast, which, by the way, is available on iTunes and all your favorite podcast apps. You can catch a fresh new episode every Monday through Friday on FS1, starting at 6:30 a.m. Eastern, 3:30 a.m. Pacific. So long, everyone.